welcoming Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. I accept invitations like this to come and say thank you and to share the credit with what was an amazing team. The Trump-Pence for President and Vice President campaign had a fraction of the personnel and a fraction of the budget of Team Hillary. I was once told that over in Brooklyn, the Hillary campaign had one person committed to a county. And I said, come again? Because we had like one person committed to 4 states. And they would literally have one person in charge of Mecklenburg County, one person in charge of Luzerne. I said, what does that person do all day? I'm just so curious. And it turns out none of that matters, because you can have all the king's horses, all the king's men, all the king's money, but there is no substitute for a candidate that connects with people, that communicates to their hearts and to their minds and to their greater aspirations. And that's what we had in Donald Trump. The other thing that Donald Trump was able to do, which is a pet cause of mine for 2 decades, was to rescue the Republican Party out of this electability fiction of who can win, who can't win, he can win, who can't win. They were the 3 most poisonous words for years. And they were really sucking the lifeblood out of great challengers and men and women who would love to serve and love to run for office, but they'd be told, even before they can get started, stop, you can't win. And the Democrats never listened to that. Jimmy Carter was told, what a ridiculous idea this is. You can't win. Thanks for the advice, and he ran and won. Bill Clinton was told, that's not a very smart idea. You have this woman's problem. Arkansas is the 2nd poorest state economy in the country. Thanks for the advice, he ran and was a 2-term president. Barack Obama was told, wait your turn. Hillary has got it wrapped up. Same thing we were supposed to believe 8 years later. He was told, Barack Obama was told, don't run, you can't win. Thanks for the advice, 2-term president. And so the Democrats never listened to that. And the Republicans always said, you're right, I can't win, I'll step aside. So Donald Trump took this fiction of electability and replaced it with electricity. As Laura Trump, my friend and colleague, just said, this was the election cycle where voters decided they would take their country back. And before that, Republicans decided they would take their party back. They said, I've got all these choices and all this time. Why do I have to commit? Why do I have to listen? You know who was usually telling us which Republican can win? The Democrats and the people on TV. Now, when they tell you which Republican can win, run as fast as you can away from that person, because they know exactly who can't win. But I say that to you as you look down ballot as well in future elections. Don't reverse this wonderful trend of investing in the people and the electricity rather than giving in and leaning into this fiction of electability. Voters don't ask who can win, they ask who can lead. And their definition of leadership is very different than the definition of who can cross the finish line. They want to know who is going to look out for their pocketbook and personal liberty issues. They do want Obamacare repealed and replaced with something better and more affordable. North Carolinians and Americans across the country want to make sure they can keep more of their hard-earned dollars. They want to make sure that students aren't trapped in failing schools just because of where they live. It's not fair. And fairness really is the theme, I believe, that Donald Trump as a candidate and now as president has as the centering force. Many people used to say, what's fair to the illegal immigrant? And Donald Trump brought in the conversation to, well, what's fair to the American worker who's competing with the illegal immigrant for a job? He's saying, what's fair to that student that I just mentioned? He's saying, what's fair to the hardworking men and women in this state and elsewhere who leave every morning at dawn and come home after dusk, work hard, and half of the money goes right out the door? What's fair to the United States taxpayer and the men and women who work in paper and cement and coal and natural gas? Is it fair for them, for us to continue in an agreement called the Paris Accords that has us front-loading the financial burden so that China and India don't even have to conform their conduct? It's all about fairness. And to Laura Trump's point, I think one of the most refreshing and attractive measures of Donald Trump as candidate and now as president, has always been that he didn't need this. People looked at that and said, he's got somewhere else to be, somewhere else to go, something else to do. And it's been an enormous sacrifice that those of us blessed enough to know the family and to serve in this administration have seen firsthand the enormous sacrifice of President Trump, of our First Lady, of the entire Trump family. And pray for them every single day, because it's not always made easy, but it's always worth it. Before I sit down with Chairman Hayes, I also wanted to say to you, to encourage each of you really, that the best thing I think you can do is, short of running for office yourselves, and please do, I never would, please do, is to have a 7-second version, a 70-second version, and a 7-minute version for whomever will listen to you. Create the opportunities to tell them, why am I a Republican? Or why do I believe? Why do I support this president's policies, this administration's goals? Tell people, because the best ambassadors out there are you. People see you and they say, you're like me, and I like you. And that is absolutely the best way to bring more people into the movement. This is not a classic political party. This is not a traditional campaign. It's a movement where people like those in Robeson County, which went here, Robeson County, plus 16.5 for President Obama in 2012, plus 4 for Donald Trump in 2016. I was the person obsessed with the counties at the campaign. All 62 of them, not one of them. But in Robeson County, you see a great example right here in North Carolina of the forgotten man and the forgotten woman standing up and saying, you know what? Our jobs, our manufacturing, our textile base have suffered. They have cratered, they have been eroded. Thank you for standing up and speaking on our behalf. Robeson County had not elected a Republican president since 1972. Had not elected, I believe, a Republican state senator or representative since Reconstruction or so. So this is transformative. By the way, that's not a squeaker. That's decisive. That's people voting on issues, not individuals. And Robin, I know I'm going to sit down with you, but I have to say, because Laura's got this party started. I mean, everybody keeps saying, why do you keep talking about Hillary Clinton? I think the question is, why does Hillary Clinton keep talking about Hillary Clinton? There are many, many, many reasons why Hillary Clinton lost. But first and foremost, you simply cannot run without a compelling, persuasive, uplifting, optimistic message that makes people feel they're inspired and included. So carry that forward with you. Thank you very much for having me. And now we're on with the main part of the interview.
I've got this microphone on. Is it working okay? We got a great AV man over there. Thank you. Well, I look like a TV preacher and air traffic controller. We are so glad to have you here.
My privilege.
I remember early on, back in another century, as a young congressman, I wasn't very bright, not like our David Rouser and Richard Hudson, meeting you in a meeting. And folks, you ever been in a meeting where you knew that there was one person without question who was the smartest person in the room? That was my impression. So it's been a privilege to know her and to see her professional career blossom, and to have her here in North Carolina is a treat. We have a lot of questions. We didn't know any way we could let all 500 people ask a question, so we put together a compilation of what you were telling us that you wanted Kellyanne to speak to. First and foremost, in North Carolina, things were developing. President Trump, Vice President Pence, family members, particularly Laura came. What did you see as the campaign developed that gave you the chance or the opportunity to create leverage for that campaign here in North Carolina?
It's a great question, Robin. And North Carolina was a very unique case because obviously President Obama, then Senator Obama, won North Carolina. by 14,000 votes out of 4.3 million cast in 2008, and didn't really compete in North Carolina in 2012, and it was the only one of the 8 or 9 swing states that Governor Romney actually won. So, and we knew in the off years, that North Carolina was electing Republicans, that you had Tom Tillis defeat Kay Hagan in the last Senate election 2 years earlier, or that year, and he was running a great race in that regard, and she had some vulnerabilities. And then previously, of course, that Senator Burr had been reelected, and we have, I think, 10 out of the 13, 10 or so congressional districts got 10 Republican members. So we knew we had Governor McCrory. We knew that Republicans, that voters were not allergic to having Republicans statewide. So the question is, how did they get there? Yes, Richard and Congressman Roosevelt, you get there on force of your personality, no doubt, but you get there because you run on issues, and you get there because you run on principles and policies. And so we tried to reflect that back into North Carolina. Fundamentally, though, we literally could not have won North Carolina without our 2 greatest assets, which were President Trump and his family, and then Vice President Pence once he became the nominee, vice presidential nominee. They were our 2 greatest assets, and at our campaign, you had people at the senior levels of the campaign working on the scheduling, because it was so incredibly important to know exactly where to put Mr. Trump and Governor Pence. And our campaign took a big chance. We did 50% digital ads and 50% conventional television ads. Most people don't realize that, because we noticed, well, first of all, we had less money, but secondly, we noticed that, one, that's where people are living now. They're living online, and it's a place where it's a trusted source for them to get information on a number of topics, and people are always looking at their screens. But it's also that we knew from previous experiences here and elsewhere that people really get tired of you being in their living room 500 times in a row with the same 30-second message. Like, I heard you the first 495 times. Got it. And it's expensive and it's repetitive, and it's just not the way people consume their information now and share information. So we looked at, I'm a data person. I can't design, draw, or decorate anything. So my mind has always gone to math and science and remembering people's names. Test me. But at the same time, looking at the data, I realized we had to manage our deficits in counties like Wake and Mecklenburg, certainly, because we knew that we would lose those counties, but the question is by how much? Did the same thing in a state like Pennsylvania, the 6 collar counties around Philadelphia. I grew up on the Jersey side of Philly and South Jersey. Thank you for that introduction. And so managing those deficits would be important, and running up the totals in the suburban and rural areas, which was exactly what happened in North Carolina. The other thing was having a major point person in each state, so people on the ground, like our great North Carolina team that Laura already acknowledged and appreciated, and we do as well. That's incredibly important, because you need people who believe in door knocking, in precinct captains, in the traditional retail politicking of signs in the yards and stickers on the bumpers. Because there's so much money in politics now, because there's so much appreciation for it. If it's not on TV, it's not real. So much belief in that regard. People have lost the essence of how valuable it is for the same mom in her minivan who goes by the same intersection 6 times a day to really see your message. So we very much believe in that. And then in North Carolina, we had a not-so-secret weapon, and no joke, in Laura Trump. She went everywhere in the state, and she took her team of women with her. I love that night. Remember the night you people say, give us some examples from North Carolina, the campaign trail. I actually have many, but one night was late in the campaign, and you introduced your father-in-law, and the teleprompter fell and broke, remember? He just kept going. He basically said, this is like a dream, this is my dream come true. I wanted the teleprompter to break, and he just kept going. But when you saw the crowd size and you realized that he was building a movement, and frankly, the media would say, yes, we saw the crowd size, but will they vote? No, they just stood in the rain for 3 hours to be here. They're not going to show up on November 8th. Okay. And you do show up. And thank you for that. So really, it's a combination, and that's why I say you can do this in all of your campaigns. It wasn't about who had the most money. It was who had the best message with the best messenger, and the most, I think, sort of the moment and broad delivery system. Delivery is not a style. Delivery is not what are you wearing or
how do you look up at the point? Delivery is now a system. It's giving you the message where you live. And there are some people who still want that mail piece in their box. There are some people who want it in a text. They want it in an email. They want it digitally. There are others who want you to call them. There are others who want you to show up. And so we just did an all of the above strategy in that regard. Really manage the deficits. Don't listen to the naysayers and critics that you can't win, you can't do this. Politely thank them and move on and really show them. And try to run up those totals in areas where you are, I think, most resonant. It's an old-fashioned strategy, but I'm glad to say in 2016, where billions of dollars are literally spent, all told through all the groups and the campaigns, that the secret sauce is just very obvious to all of us. It's some of it's old-fashioned.
Thank you for the Here's the question of the century. How are you going to answer it? But as the acknowledged counselor, one of, to the president, what is that like?
It's amazing. It's the greatest blessing of my professional career. Greatest blessing of my life is my 4 children, naturally, but that and that I was born into an Italian family. But the greatest professional blessing is being able to work with President Trump and Vice President Pence and the team every single day, because I grew up in a middle-class town, maybe. Some days I wonder. Certainly in a lower to middle-class family. And I grew up around people who are the forgotten men or forgotten women. I grew up where nobody really went to college, let alone law school, but they were the most decent, God-fearing, loving, generous people I've ever known. And most of the country is filled with them. Not the talking heads, not the noise, but people who really just are so patriotic and want this country to succeed and want to be left alone, just to worship their God and raise their children as they see fit and be able to direct their own hard-earned money beyond what they pay as the citizenry for essential services. And I think that background has helped a great deal to appreciate my job every day, because we're there for the country. We're there to make a difference. And I've got this saying that, what's the RPI? What's the RPI? And that really means, what's the real people impact? Who will this help? We can't just check a box. You can't eliminate or start a program or have a commission without real people impact. Who will this help, and how do we help them? And in that regard, this is a White House that collects so many different ideas and inputs and insights from everyone. We've had coal miners in there and small business owners. The president has met with the top CEOs and big brains of the country, and he's had over 20 bilateral meetings in the White House. Just came back from a 9-day foreign trip where he, really, I think, just did an unprecedented job of meeting. First with him giving a speech to 55 Muslim countries in Saudi Arabia, and then going right to Israel, and then over to the Vatican, and then of course to NATO and the G7. And just those 5 major stops shows you a man who is receptive to improving America's standing in the world, but also always reminding them that, as he said the other day so eloquently, he represents Pittsburgh, not Paris, recognizing that we are part of the global construct, of course, but that his first duty is to America and Americans and her interests and her allies. I specifically went to the White House not to do press or comms, but since it's so important to this president, I was trying to get off of TV, but we all make it on there at some point. I try to support the press and comms efforts by our very large and talented press and comms teams. My portfolio includes, I'm part of the tax policy work that's being spearheaded by others, by Secretaries Mnuchin and Ross and Director Cohn, working very hard on healthcare, continued. I'm so old I remember Hillary Care, and then Obamacare. I've been there for all of those. And then I've got opioid addiction and drug addiction in my portfolio. No state has been spared, including your own. No demographic group untouched. This is the scourge of our times, and it's very sad to watch families torn apart and innocent people's lives lost. And this president is very committed to reducing the impact of opioid abuse in our communities. So we've been traveling around the country with Secretary Tom Price on that, and working with Governor Christie, who's the head of the White House Commission. They were both in the White House yesterday, in fact. Veterans is in my portfolio. I support the efforts that other people are doing. Nobody owns an issue at the White House, nor should they. So it's really, these are all team efforts. And also one thing that I've been involved with very recently that I'm sure will take me back down here to North Carolina is military spouse employment. We're hearing from many of the men and women, predominantly women, who are having a difficult time finding meaningful and gainful and permanent employment, full-time employment as military spouses. I think sometimes employers look at them as transient, and I look at them as incredibly committed to their country and very talented. So we are trying to work with the Department of Labor. As the President has said, as the President of the United States has said, if we don't take care of our veterans and their families, who are we as a country? He really puts that challenge to all of us. And I look at issues like that, Robin, as nonpartisan issues in search of bipartisan solutions. And I am very happy to say, particularly on the issue of opioids, that when we invited 10 United States senators to the White House recently to talk about this issue, 6 of them were Democrats. And we invited about 20 or 25 members of Congress came, and you had Sheila Jackson Lee sitting among them. I wasn't expecting that. But everybody knows that they've got to find some areas of agreement, and then frankly, we have to find areas where we want certain ideas to prevail and others to fail, because that's how he got there. And he has promised, I don't think it's a big mystery, yes. I don't think it's a big mystery as to what the program is in this administration. He could not have made it more clear, and voters could not have been more outspoken about the change that they wanted to come to Washington: transparency and accountability, prosperity and security. And even though every day is so incredibly full and heady, we can't expect everything to happen in the first 6 months either. I think Donald Trump spoils us all with his energy and his high level of achievement. I remember his campaign manager saying, okay, we have to make a decision. I remember the day, we have to make a decision. I was telling him on the phone. At the end of we're going to, and I listed it, it was North Carolina and Florida and Ohio, and Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. We have to decide whether we add on Minnesota or Virginia. And he basically said, those sound good, and went to both the same day. Like 6 or 7 stops that day. And that's how he is as president. My whole life, I prided myself on being able to outwork anybody. And I have so met my match. Nobody outworks him.
The United States is the financial powerhouse, the capital of the world. We've been strangled, we've been hamstrung, with federal regulations that have kept our economy from growing. Outline for us what President Trump is doing and will do to untangle that backlash that was the Obama regulation.
Sorry, thank you.
Uh-oh. The traffic control mic failed.
Thank you. Well, on day 3 of his presidency, the president made good on his promise to get the United States out of TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And his reason was very simple. He kept saying on the campaign trail, says now as president, that he's not against deals. Of course we'll have trade deals. We'll have bilateral trade deals. But he wants deals that benefit, don't burden America and Americans. He wants better deals. That was on day 3. We haven't even unpacked our boxes yet. And since then, he's made great strides at repealing and replacing Obamacare, which, as you all know, is a huge job killer in this country. So many people talk about health care as from the consumer perspective. And from the consumer perspective, of course, that's why he wants people, the 20 million people or so last year who opted out of Obamacare. It's so great that 20 million people opted out of it. 6.5 million were willing to pay a money penalty rather than have this plan we're supposed to hear now is so wonderful and popular. And you know, because it's going on in North Carolina, it's going on everywhere, that so many of our counties in this country, roughly 1/3 or more of our counties, have one insurer. 6 or 7 states now and counting have one insurer. That's not choice. And so that's a huge job killer because in addition to the consumer side of healthcare, there's the provider side of healthcare. And women are disproportionately the leaders on both. We are 2 out of every 3 healthcare dollars spent in this country are pretty much controlled by women. You wouldn't even go to the doctor, guys, if we didn't tell you to, so come on. And urge you to. And we are disproportionately the providers as well. About 90% of the nurses, about 95% of the home health aides, almost half of the pharmacy and medical students. And so women really are leading this charge toward better healthcare as providers and consumers. And that's been a job killer. The other one is what he did 2 days ago, where he made good on another campaign promise, but more importantly, made good on the campaign promise to bring prosperity and protecting our sovereignty, bring prosperity, and get better deals for this country by stopping the enforcement and cooperation with the implementation, frankly, of the Paris Accords. And if you go back, and you listen to, sorry, I'm right-handed, so I'm always that way. If you go back and you listen, you go back and watch the president in the Rose Garden 2 days ago, or 2 days ago, it's very important to listen to all of his words. He gave an incredibly powerful explanation as to why he was doing this. And in the same breath, in the same sentence, he said, I'm withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, and we will immediately start to either renegotiate or re-enter, evaluate. This is what businessmen do. They evaluate, they negotiate. Sometimes they walk away from a deal waiting for a better one. Sometimes they dive into a deal and they make it better. But this is what leaders do. And had Donald Trump just thought, it's my way or the highway, he would have done that on day one. It took months because he really was balancing the viewpoints of people that he cares very much for and whose opinions he respects. And he took all that in. That's what leaders do. They absorb many different ideas and inputs. They weigh the consequences, the benefits, and the burdens. And then he and he alone makes the final decision. So I think these are good examples. Also, you just have these crazy regulations, Dodd-Frank, Sarbanes-Oxley, we've been living under all this time. He's made very clear what he's going to do about those. And then also, we just need to unleash prosperity by relieving everybody's tax burden. The idea that I've long been a soft critic of, or a helpful critic, I thought, of the Republican Party writ large, only talking to the job creators. And I was a job creator for 21 and a half years. I had my own company. I loved it. Started from scratch, and I loved being a job creator. I loved being an entrepreneur. But that's not for everyone. It's risky. It's hard. It's unstable. I started it when I was single and didn't have children. I probably would have done that later on in life. But that's not for everyone. So if we're only talking to the job creators, then we're speaking about 7% of the country. And then if we're talking to the job seekers, the unemployed, we're talking to another 7%. I know, 4.3% as of yesterday. But I'll just say 7%, for those looking, just for argument's sake of talking to the job seekers, less than 10%, job creators, less than 10%. The vast majority of households in North Carolina and across this country are neither job seekers nor job creators. They are job holders. And Donald Trump was the first candidate that I can recall running for president to really speak in modern times to the job holders. Basically saying, when my grandfather had a job and your grandfather had a job, the job was enough. You could support your entire family, take a nice station wagon vacation every summer. When did the job no longer become enough? We'd go all around North Carolina and hear from people, listen, we have a job. In fact, we have 2 and 3 jobs in our household. We're not worried about losing the job or replacing a lost job. But why am I white-knuckled at the end of every month trying to make the rent or mortgage, trying to make the car payment, the tuition payment? Why am I struggling to decide whether grandma could move in or we can help her afford long-term care? Why can't I put my child in a better school? Why do we come up short? We're working. And so the job holders need that tax bracket lowered, need the regulations and the burdens of Obamacare and environmental regulations lowered. And now, if you're in a specific industry, like coal, you're in cement, paper, you've already had so many regulations stopped or rolled back. And they've been to the White House, tearfully thanking this president, passionately thanking this president for his leadership and for his action. So help us on the way. Imagine if Donald Trump gets his way as president, and you have a 15% bracket for small business owners in this country. I've been thinking about that as a former small business owner. Imagine what you could do. More of that money and reinvest it. Imagine all the would-be entrepreneurs who for the last 8 years have put their American dream on the shelf. They will come back out and will say, I think I can convert my hobby or my talents into a full-blown small business enterprise. I'm going to give that a chance. You know what we hear from people, particularly female small business owners, they're even more of a worry than access to capital, access to clients, access to talented workers, is access to being able to afford quality health care and that tax burden, because they're left with very little for all the hard work. So all of that put together, knit together, will be, I think, greater prosperity for many Americans and retaining our strength in the world as the financial capital.
Unquestionably, and also, President Trump had citizens of Princeville, Edgecombe County, who had terrible flood damage, Christian school from Concord, so he's covered Concord, Charlotte, beg your pardon, Mecklenburg. Anyway, next question. President Trump has suffered unprecedented attacks from the drive-by media. They would have you believe that he is distracted from doing his job by this constant bombardment of negative press. That's not true.
It's not true. He's not distracted at all. In fact, we know the difference between noise and news. And we know that many of the same people attacking him neither wanted or, keyword, expected him to be the president. It just didn't prepare anybody for the possibility that the other one of the two candidates in what they had called a divided country could actually win. And I was just looking at I love to carry around on my phone pictures of the last polling numbers by the mainstream media before the election results. Boy, those are doozies. Talk about junk science. Talk about alternative facts. So the last polling numbers before the election, the public polling numbers by the mainstream media, on my phone, I'm happy to share them with you, had Hillary Clinton up in the state, had Hillary Clinton up for close to 5 points nationwide, had Hillary Clinton up in Pennsylvania. There was not one public poll ever that showed Donald Trump beating Hillary Clinton in the state of Pennsylvania. And we kept going back there. We were obsessed with Pennsylvania. And Mrs. Trump went there. All of the adult children went there. Tiffany had just graduated from Penn. There she was doing a 3-day tour in Pennsylvania. So we were obsessed with it because we saw the message was working. And the polls are one thing, but the polls all underreported what they're underreporting now as a media, which is the enthusiasm and the prayerfulness and the encouragement of this president to do well and to succeed on behalf of all of us. They undervalued you then. They're undervaluing and I think underemphasizing his support now. It's not distracting. I think it bothers me for one simple reason, that at least I was raised in a very non-political household of 4 adult women, and I was raised to always respect the office of the presidency and its current occupant, no matter who it is, and to pray for that person. And what should bother all of us, Robin, including our Democratic friends, is the words and the adjectives that are used so glibly and so freely, and yes, I say so liberally, about this president and his family. And let me just say for the record, the idea, because I'm infuriated, which takes a lot for me, the idea that anyone would ever do anything than pray every night for this woman, Laura Trump, to have a healthy baby boy is a disgrace. The idea that anybody would show a decapitated version of the president when we've had James Foley and Daniel Pearl at the hands of ISIS treated the same exact way, ruthless terrorists, and then blame the Trump family for her woes. I mean, this is the country we live in. Kathy Griffin thinks that she can speak that way about the president, thinks it's funny, because the circles in which she travels usually think it's funny. It's not funny. And as a Secret Service protector, big country out there, and there are tens of millions of people who support the president's, and hundreds of millions, over 100 million who support the president's agenda, support the country, want him to succeed. And before people start pulling up the approval ratings and discounting that number, let me just help you out here for a moment. I wrote an article 18 years ago that I probably presented in one of those meetings where we were, called The Unbearable Lightness of Approval Ratings. I'll tell you which numbers, so I will say that when they're up and I'll say that when they're down. What matters is how people feel about the economy, how they feel about their safety and prosperity. And And if you look at all the confidence numbers, they're way up. Consumer confidence, way up. Small business formation and expansion confidence, way up. Home builders confidence at a 12-year high. Manufacturing confidence went from 56.6% a year ago to 93.3% this year. That's not around the We have the lowest unemployment number since 2001, 16 years, 4.3%. We have more jobs added as of yesterday, and the jobs up in industries like drilling and coal. And that's very important because those are the industries that the president committed to help, and those are the industries that he has been helping. So you see the net effect of that even right away in these, before we've been 5 months on the job.
Couple quick stories about achievements that the press has missed in their coverage.
It's a great question. So I'm not somebody who talks about fake news, enemy of the people, opposition party. I actually don't speak that way. So I feel like I'm on solid ground to say the following, which is the biased media coverage is one thing, and that's not everybody, to be fair. That is many people, but that's not everybody. But it's not biased coverage, it's incomplete coverage that is my pet cause, because there's so many great stories and so many great pieces of legislation and regulations being rolled back that get no coverage. 14 congressional review acts so far by this president. That's huge. President George W. Bush had done 1 in his first 100 days. President Obama 0. This president, I think by 100 days, had done 12, and not 13 or 14. Those are important because it's basically the president looking at congressional action and saying, this doesn't make any sense. It's hurting people. It's burdensome. Is the federal government being invasive, intrusive, expensive, and expansive unnecessarily? And I'm doing that. Healthcare reform is halfway there. It's well on its way. You heard a little bit about that, but all you heard were there's going to be pain and suffering and people dying. And I want to ask weeks later, is that no longer the case? Because I don't hear you frothing at the mouth about that anymore. What he's done to get coal miners back to work, what he's done for small businesses, what he's done for, so some other statistics, I'll pick a day from this week. I'll pick Wednesday. I'll just pick a random day for you. This past week, 3 days ago on Wednesday, and if I said raise your hand if you hadn't heard any of this, you'd all be raised hand. On Wednesday, Secretary of Transportation Elaine Chao announced over $500 million in infrastructure investments for our nation's airports. Over 500 airports across our country are receiving $500 million. You didn't hear that because it's positive news. Now, what's the $500 million for? To enhance your safety and security, to reduce your hassle, to work on these runways, to work on enhancements, to bring that type of infrastructure up to date. And that's going to go along with air traffic control reform that's coming early next week. Now, people may say, oh, but that, I can't get clicks and sell ads on infrastructure reform, right, media? But that's what you all need to know about. That actually impacts your lives. That's not speculative. I know people on TV must be getting $100 every time they say Russia, Russia, Russia. But infrastructure, healthcare, taxes, that affects you. And it's not speculative, it's real. On the same day, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Dr. David Shulkin, announced that the VA had set up a White House hotline. So our veterans can call in. It's a soft launch. There'll be a bigger launch. Veterans can call into a hotline into the White House and get help. And it's honest reporter and you wanted to write a story about the Veterans Hotline this week, you would have to then say, oh, and this is the latest reform measure by President Trump, who also, about 6 weeks ago or so, signed into law the Veterans Choice Act. And the Choice Act means that veterans who cannot access timely and quality care through the VA, and most do, that they can go into the private sector to access it. They also will have a better portal, and we're working on better portals because we find that much of the government can't talk to each other. There's all these different programs. And that's something that Jared Kushner's been working on, is getting the government to be more efficient and work and talk to each other more crisply. And then they also would have had to say that he also went to the Veterans Administration about 3 or 4 weeks ago and announced another big measure. But the fact that you don't know that doesn't mean you're not paying attention. It means nobody's telling you because it's positive news. And it's one thing, I think the opposite of negative is not just positive. The opposite of negative is relevant. And we need to know it's relevant because I'm sure some of you in this room are thinking right now that I said all that, you're thinking and you're picturing neighbors and friends and relatives and colleagues and acquaintances who can benefit from these measures and who probably also don't know that these measures are taking hold. So that's my whole point about being the best ambassadors. And then on that same day, you had our OMB director, Mick Mulvaney, talk about some of the implications of the latest budget and who will benefit from the latest budget as well. So it's just picking one simple day where you heard none of that because it's positive news.
Thank you. Heading down the home stretch, there is a room full of people here that love, appreciate, and support the president. As a professional, give us your best advice on what we can do to support our president against this onslaught of whatever you want to call it.
Well, first is don't repeat it, don't believe it, and don't buy into it. Don't even lean into it. The minute that you kind of tilt your head and shrug your shoulders and crinkle your nose like, you've given into it. You have to stay strong. Remember how strong you were 6 months ago, 16 months ago, 18 months ago. Stay strong. You came this far. You can't let it get undone by people, who are naysayers and critics who don't want him to be president in the first place, and who frankly don't even support the agenda. Don't know anybody who owns a firearm. Don't know anybody who's pro-life. Don't know anybody who's wants their taxes reduced or cares. Doesn't know anybody who thinks there may be a better way for us to balance environmental protection and economic growth than this nonsense deal that was poorly negotiated. If it were so great, then maybe the last president would have presented it to the Senate for ratification. But doing this so number one, don't repeat it, don't lean into it, don't give it any credence. Number two, fight back, fight insults and innuendo and insinuations with facts and figures. Go onto whitehouse.gov, you'll find all the statistics I'm talking about. Our press secretary, Sean Spicer, every day before he takes the Q&A, he actually starts every briefing out by reading a list of what is going on that day or that week, and it gets very little coverage. You've got some members of the press literally live tweeting at our press secretary instead of listening to what he's saying about these measures. So if you go on and you access that, you'll see everything that's been done, the regulation, the legislation, the executive orders. You can see it for yourselves. And it's a pretty impressive list. You'll say, wow, they've been busy, he's been busy. So I think the best way to fight fire is with facts and figures. The other thing to do is what you've been doing. So you're definitely going to want to work with Laura in the campaign. I'm clearly not involved in that. They're in great hands. But that's the political side. We're not involved in that at all. On the policy side, do what I asked you to do up at the podium, which is get those neighbors and those friends and those colleagues who say, I hate politics, or I hate all the negativity, or I don't blame them for saying they hate politics, but this is not politics. This is policy. This is democracy. This is restoring and increasing and enhancing our freedoms. This is, hey, I know you hate politics, but that's just a means toward the end. The end is more school choice and charters. The end is educational alternatives. The objective here is appreciating and respecting and, in fact, increasing the opportunities for our men and women to have vocational and technical education. Not everybody is college material. And we as a nation should start saying, great, because when I was younger, my mom said, honey, marry a plumber or a lawyer. And George is a lawyer, but every time a plumber walks in my house and wants $200 as he takes off his shoes, I'm like, Mom was right. We need to respect the value of skilled labor in this country and encourage our youth to you have to talk about putting ISIS in retreat. I mean, I was astonished to be at the Democratic National Convention last summer in Philadelphia, and I'm reading along Hillary's speech, waiting to go on Hanley's show, sitting there reading along her speech, and she literally never said the word ISIS. She never said radical Islamic terror. She said our, quote, determined enemies, which is basically like the way, UNC and Duke feel about each other when they these are determined enemies. They're savage murderers doing their bidding constantly against everyone. And we're this determined enemy. So remember, you voted for somebody who calls them what they are. And All right, we got it all now. That is true in terms of the House, the Senate, the White House, the state legislatures. I think there are 99 state legislative bodies, Nebraska's unicameral, and of the 99, 60-some are Republican. Now you've got over 20 states where it's all Republican, the governorship and certainly the two lower chambers. So that's not a coincidence, that's called causation. And people expect there to be results. The excuse of divided government is over. But at the same time, remember, movements come from the bottom up, not the top down. So keep your phone lists and your door knocking programs. Keep talking to people about everything. And look, I'm just going to put it out there for you because I think one of the most inspired, brilliant moments for Donald Trump, the candidate, and there were many, came on October 19th in that final debate in Las Vegas. When Donald Trump, who was formerly a pro-choice and was always a Manhattan male billionaire, who said he was pro-choice, gave the most impassioned defense of life that I've ever heard from a presidential debate podium. And he did it in a way that I'm going to use as an example for you on how to push back in a couple ways. Number one, I'm sitting in a room where out of 500 of you, I probably know 50 of you. I didn't look out completely, maybe 80 of you. And God bless you all, but I guarantee you in this room right now, there are pro-lifers and there are pro-choicers. I guarantee you, I just know it. And I know it because you belong to the Republican Party. And so you're welcome here. We have female United States senators right now that are pro-life and pro-choice. That is not the case in the Democratic Party. A guy just ran for mayor of Omaha and couldn't get any support because he's pro-life. Or he had voted for one pro-life measure ever, and they went after him and wanted him to lose as a Democrat. You belong to a party that respects different points of view. And you belong to a party where your president, in a debate against a viable, and we were told imminently successful, female presidential candidate who's an icon of the pro-choice feminist left, had nothing to say when she was told, you're actually the extremist on this because you're, would rip the baby out of the womb in the last seat. You put it away, and I went, ooh, and I think the whole country went, ooh, and I said, that's good. But the point being, don't give in like, oh, you're right, we are kind of, yeah. No, we're not. Show them who's extreme. And by the way, ask your Democratic friends the burning question I have, who exactly on God's green earth is the leader of your party? Because I haven't a clue, I can't find it. Who is the leader of your party? Is it Hillary Clinton, who will not go away? I used to say, oh God, why would she go away? Now I'm kind of getting comfortable with it. I'm like, what'd she say today? Whose fault is it today? Is it Hillary Clinton leading her party where you've got many Democrats now rolling their eyes, raising their eyebrows, and snickering about it behind the scenes? Is it Tom Perez, who actually has the title, chairman of the Democratic National Committee? Is it Barack Obama, who decided he'd be in New York at the same time the president was to give a paid speech and had to weigh in on the Paris Accords the moment this president, and the only president we have right now, was acting on it? Is it Bernie Sanders, whose folks show up every time Tom Perez, the quote chairman of the party, is somewhere and heckle him? Who is the leader of the Democratic Party? Their bench for the future is thin, and you have the White House. So think about that the next time you're embroiled in an argument.